Okay, welcome to a Poker Tell breakdown. This hand is from Beyond Tells, the largest behavioral study ever conducted on poker players. For those of you who don't know, we set up two very large studies where we recorded players from multiple angles and broke down every single thing that they did. If you want to learn more about poker tells and how live reads and behavior can be integrated into your game, make sure you check out the Behavioral Edge. I put the link below. So in this video, basically, what I'm going to do is first just go through the video really quickly so you get the context. And then I'm going to discuss a little bit about behavior, a little bit about the game context in this specific hand, and we're going to be viewing it from the perspective of the player in the 4 seat who happens to have Queen 10 suited, and we're playing against the player in the 1 seat, the legendary John Beaupre. So really quickly, let me go over this hand. So what's happening is player in the 1 seat, John, is going to raise to 20. Then we are going to 3-bet to 60. Followed by a call. Flops Queen 10 deuce or Queen deuce 10. It's going to go check bet, raise, call. Turns a king. It's going to be check, bet, call. And then river, John is going to shove. Boop. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the beginning. We're going to be looking at this hand from the perspective that we're in the 4 seat, and we're going to be discussing behavior, the game context, and all of that. So let's get started. All right, John checks his cards quickly, reaches immediately for chips, plays with them in his right hand, and then is going to quickly shoot out $20. So like I've said in the Beyond Tells training and in the Behavioral Edge training, link below, one of the most useful moments when it comes to behavior and tells in the game is going to be when a player checks their cards, immediately what they did after. After checking like 20,000 card checks and monitoring these motions, it's very easy to see when players in the top of their range or their marginal, specifically in certain players. However, given this context and what we've seen right here, there is nothing out of the ordinary. Player reaches for his cards, bets. We can find differences when we compare John's bets hand to hand to hand to hand and maybe see some subtleties, but all there is to notice right now is it's just a standard raise to 20 when he's under the gun in a 6 max game. Now, as I go through this, I just want to briefly give you some context. So this is hand 71 in this game. At this particular point when John raises, this player should be able to pick up that John has been the most aggressive player at the table by far. He's in a third of hands probably, and he is very active. He's 3-bet heavy. He's calling a ton, and he's obviously the most aggressive player at the table. You'd be a pretty bad poker player if you just didn't observe that at a very basic level. Not talking about range constructions or frequencies or anything like that. Just simply this guy's playing a lot. So he has to take that into his consideration process. Or, yeah, this actual process. He's going to check his cards and then 3-bet to 60. So as I said before, there is no real behavioral observation here. And when we don't have a behavioral observation or we don't know, and he might have something at this point, but I don't think so. I don't think this player was applying Beyond Tell systems. So sometimes you'll see, like myself, when I play, do something really weird or out of the line because I have a specific behavior that's driving that aggression or driving that decision-making process. I don't think he has that here. I think he's just, essentially 3-betting the most aggressive player at the table while he's on the button, which makes sense. 3-bet to 60 with Queen 10 suited is absolutely fine, makes sense. Also, he has a little bit more context. He's got Fiery Fausto, who's a very aggressive player immediately to his left, who's definitely prone to be attacking raise call spots and also just be involved in that spot. I guess he's doing that just to play heads up against John, makes sense. Also, it's going to be easier to play against John when he's involved in so many hands by 3-betting him. I think it's just easier to understand where you're at if he calls the 3-bet. So I definitely think the raise is fine here given this game conditions and dynamic. We could have a bigger discussion about the sizing about this spot and how it relates to behavior and tells, and we're not going to do that now. The discussion, just as a quick aside, I think sizing is a area of the game that a lot of players get wrong in the sense of the order of things that they're doing. So many players will ask us questions here at School of Cards, like, how much should I size to? Should it be 60 or 75? And like, sizing is very important. It's essential in poker. But before you focus on sizing, you need to also know like when you should be raising a hand, when you should be taking an aggressive action on what boards. And most players focus too much on the subtleties instead of knowing like, okay, this is a good board for my range. I need to bet here, because you want to be defaulted in those spots so that you can dedicate sort of that higher functioning or that higher level process to things like behavior and to things like maximizing or understanding sizing. That's a way that's very exploitive and not just focusing on standards. And you can't do that unless you work on defaults. So for those all of you who are like, oh, sizing, sometimes when you're really profitable and you're trying to carve out I guess a bigger edge, you want to start focusing on sizing, but make sure mechanically you know when to bet and why you're betting before you get into details on sizing. Sorry for the little rant, but it's important. Okay, so let's see how John reacts to this. He is thinking about what to do. He's a thinking player, so we're obviously going to see that. And he calls, a little bit of a flick, not much to say there. We could definitely say things about his range right now, but we'll wait for our actions here. So Queen Deuce 10 board. John continues to play and does the good old-fashioned check. I don't know what that is. I just made that up. How players check is very valuable. Players do things called give-up checks, which is just like whatever, next hand. A lot of players don't take advantage of that. One of my favorite lines, like when players like do like a give-up check on the turn, and then players on the river don't size enough to get them actually off that hand. That's another story. I'll talk about that later. All right, so this player is going to bet 65. Okay, and at this point, right, you just may be obvious to some of you, not to some of you. I don't know what levels of players are watching this, but you know, we're obviously beat by deuces, queens, and tens. We heavily block queens and tens, and you know, only beat by a handful of combos at this point when we have queen 10. This is a flop that we could expect him to be raising with strong draws, flush draws, straight draws. Now it's hard to know if he, like, what he essentially is going to do. So let's let him do that. But he's got a lot of hands here. John's considering what to do. I definitely don't think he's folding. And he's going to raise to 190. Same execution style, not much to say, consistent with his chip playing. For all of you people that are trying to make nothing out of something, I have seen it so much in comments on my stuff. Like, oh, but did you see he like moved his head a little bit? 99% of the behavior out there is just complete noise. You need a method and a process to interpret that noise. That's what Beyond Tells is. It's a systematic approach to behavior. We're not about watching players and being, there's so much content out there that like finds the one moment where the player makes like a weird facial expression and goes, oh my God, you see that? That's an indication that that player is weak. When in reality, that player did that 10 times throughout the 3-hour session, and this one time just happens to be the time he was bluffing. Like, it's silliness. There's nothing to really process right now except he's playing the game. It's just the game context of what he's doing. It's important to say that. Now, okay, so for our player in our 4-seat, here we can call or raise. He's obviously not folding. That's pretty obvious. So the benefits of calling: 1, he will continue his bluffs on the turn, most likely. 2, if he's overplaying a queen, we don't want him to fold here since he's likely to keep putting more money in the pot and he's quite behind at this junction. Problems with calling are: 1, if he hits this draw on the turn, we may have a hard time continuing, especially if he sizes on the bigger side, which I think he might do. Another problem with this particular player is that we aren't sure what draw he could have. He can connect with so many cards in the turn, and we are probably going to have to call regardless because this player just has so many bluffs in their range. I think that given the context, calling is fine and a good play. There's no behavioral elements here to really discuss until later, which is why I'm bringing up this hand in the first place. So let me fast forward here a little bit for you, because John does not change again. Relatively consistent, good style of concealment, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and he happens to call. All right, another fist bump style check. Which is interesting. I mean, I think this player should be thinking about the fact that, like, that king is good for a lot of John's range right now. John could be checking his entire range right now, but he could also just not want to blow this pot out of proportion. I'll have to ask him. I'm not, I mean, really at a fundamental level, everybody's got a different process. This player could just be thinking, am I behind or am I ahead? How much am I behind? How much am I ahead? You know, it's another thing about behavior. It really allows you to see how players are thinking. Not everybody is sitting there going, oh, I'm ahead of these amount of combos, these amount of combos, and if I check fold here and he doesn't understand my range. Like, some people are just like, you know, I beat a queen. Like, there's different levels of process at the game, and a lot of players just consistently project their process onto other players, when in reality, how a player is thinking, how a player is approaching the game, how a player is considering their decisions, it's all being displayed on their body. And most of that information is just open for interpretation, and most players don't do this. So most live players sit there, watch their phone, don't pay attention, or some really good mechanic player, like really strong players, sit there and they think that, oh, this player's, you know, just finally adjusted their 3-bet range because I'm taking advantage of. They haven't adjusted anything. They just woke up with a hand that I felt like playing. Like, this information's in front of you. You can't get it if you don't pay attention and watch people's behavior. And that's going to be a big theme of these videos. We're able to understand how a player constructs their range, how they think about hands, who's good to bluff, who's not good to bluff, all based on paying attention and focusing on behavior. Let me step off my soapbox or whatever. So he bets 310, which, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but I just don't think that's enough. We give a great price to ace king, king jack, queen jack to continue and just make it easy for him to potentially bluff us off on a river. A larger bet is probably going to be better here, specifically against John. I do also think that John is going to have a larger reaction to a larger bet, but that's, I don't want to talk about bet sizing and behavioral reactions and all that. We see a slight display of contemplation in the top half of John's face, basically by pulling his brow together. Now, contemplation in the face can mean a lot of things. Typically, a lot of players really screw up. Those of you who are advanced poker players, I don't know what that even means, but those of you who have a robust thought process and are able to think through a hand, good at hand reading, all that stuff, some of you make the big mistake of showing the entire table how you think. So a player has some sort of really weird sizing that is probably incorrect on a turn, and you go, why would you do that? And you're openly showing how you're processing information. Don't do that. Don't just openly show these reactions. I think it's a big ego thing, especially with men. Everybody wants to be Mr. Tough Guy at the poker table or tough woman and say, oh, you know, I know that that was bad. Oh, wow, somebody raised 6x pre-flop when everybody's raising 3x. Why would you do that? Like, there's all of that reactive elements. We see this everywhere we go. I see this when I play. I do really weird things sometimes. You know, jam 200 big blinds behind me on a board that makes absolutely no sense to jam because I know that they're going to fold, and players just look at me like, are you crazy? Don't do that. You're showing people how you think. Now, in this context, I think John is basically just, that's a weird bet. I don't know what he has here. What could he have here? It's just letting that slip through. Sometimes one of the more useful tells in thinking and good players. I don't like talking about tells like this from a linear point A to point B, X means Y bullshit style. Like, anytime you hear a behavioral tell where it's like, oh, if a player does this, that means that, it's usually not true. You need to absorb the context. So the context here is from a good thinking high-level player who is in a spot where they shine some sort of facial display of perplexion. They like look like this, like, huh? Followed by a very big raise is often a strong hand. This is often an emotional release of like, Why the hell are you raising that? I have the nuts. I've seen that enough to the point of where it can be useful. And if I had to flip a coin or if I had to bet on that, if I were to see it, I would definitely say that that's more an indication of strength. However, that's not how we interpret tells at Beyond Tells. We follow a framework, we follow a process, we blend it with the game context. And in this particular situation, I think it's just is what it is. John's thinking about what could this player have right here, and that's all it is. Doesn't then that's some deep dark secret. But I have seen that in a lot of samples, a lot, like dozens and dozens and dozens of times. So John calls, and we get a 9 on the river. So again, not much change, not much difference in John's behavior. But we are going to see. It's interesting to look at the other players and see who's paying attention. Good job, Fausto. Good job, Steve. You seem to be very. And he goes all in. So, from this player's perspective, it sucks. It's not the most pleasant spot to be in. We aren't beating many hands at this point, and we're not really given a good price. It's 1 point, we have to call 1.5 into 2.6K. So we have to be good like over 30% of the time. What hands do we beat? I mean, ace-x suited, ace-king, queen-9 suited. What hands beat us? I mean, like a lot. King-jack, queen-jack, jack-8 suited. Hard to think of maybe. I don't know if John's got like jack-7. I highly doubt he has that. I think the worst is probably the jack-8. King-9 suited. Not impossible that he slow played a hand like ace-jack maybe. King-queen. Again, the queens, 10s, and deuces. So this comes up. There's a lot here. It's for the most part a pretty close spot. Depending on your assumptions, you can go one way or the other. I don't really care about the closeness of this spot. I don't really think it's that close. I think you should be folding, but that's a whole other criteria. What I want to talk about here is what happens after. And essentially, right now, John goes all in. This is marked at, it's about 4 minutes and 10 seconds. And this player will spend 2 minutes and 50 seconds tanking and thinking about what to do. And the reason why I bring this up is this is probably one of the most underutilized moments in poker when it comes to behavior and live reads. There's very few players out there that do this well and take advantage of this moment utilizing speech play. You have to understand that a lot of players think that tells is just a process of observation. It's not. Using behavior, really having behavior being a driving part of your decision-making process requires you to interact with players, requires you to have discussions, to time statements, to alter your behavior. It's way more complicated than just like, oh, I think he's bluffing. Most of the players that do it like that are wrong. They're wrong in their assumptions. I've seen it. I've tested for it. Oh, I see his neck moving because he's wrong. I'll get into it in another video, but emotion is a very difficult thing to classify at the poker table. I'll discuss that later. But this is the moment where John is going to enter what we call concealment strategy. So concealment strategy is when a player is going to actively do something to conceal their behavior, right? John's not going, yay, I have the nuts, or oh my God, I'm terrified, I'm bluffing. He's using a mechanism to conceal. All players have a strategy, they have a style, they just may not know that they're using it. Some of you have a conscious concealment strategy. You like sit like this, or you sit like this, or you stand in a certain way. In this particular hand, John is going to go with what I call an absolute, it's somewhat still. It's a style, absolute stillness concealment strategy where he's going to remain still. And what this player is going to do, let me press play, is he's not really going to utilize it. So goes all in, he goes into the, let me think about what's going on. This is the moment where you want to play with your opponent. You want to, and there's a whole mechanical system behind this. I'm making this very simple right now. I want you to go below and do the training, and I sort of discuss it, but I discuss it in the real training that you pay for, obviously. at a great depth. But what we're doing is we're trying to label their concealment strategy, understanding what process they're utilizing, and then making certain assumptions about where we think we're at. So in this spot, we're either beat or he's bluffing, right? Like it's not one or the other. And I think John is a good enough player to know if this was obviously a bet where he wants his opponent to fold or wants his opponent to call. Sometimes you have some weird stuff where players that are not that experienced, they think they're value betting, but they're bluffing, or they think they're bluffing and they're value betting, which can create some weird stuff with concealment. That's not a problem here because John is a high enough level player to understand that. And based on the context of everything that we've been seeing, you should have been able to know that he's a high enough level player. So we're going to assume that player in the 4-seat knows that. So John just stays relatively still. There's no crazy change in his behavior. There's no crazy change to blink rate. There's no crazy change to facial action. It is very difficult to process or understand higher level emotional arousal in his neck or in his chest on video. It's one of the unfortunate things about video. It's very difficult to see changes in breathing and changes in flesh to skin. It's difficult, but you should be looking for those in live environments. I won't tell you how though, sorry. Some things are trade secrets, my friends. Now, in this particular context, why I want to talk about this is just two reasons. One, I don't know what the player in the 4-seat is even doing. He's I guess he's thinking through the hand. You have the person in front of you. And this is the thing. Before you can get to the level of where you're deconstructing, breaking down concealment strategy, understanding what the various subtleties of the human face mean, understanding where to look, how to look, why to look, and reverse engineer it, you need to get used to looking at players. Most players are very uncomfortable when they're actually in these spots. So they do this avoidant, let me go into my head. What you want to do is develop a simple process right now to test it. Go into your head, think about the hand, reconstruct the action, do everything that you do normally as a player. But before you do that, get an understanding of what the player actually looks like, right? What level of concealment that they're utilizing. So this was, John's absolutely still. I'd say on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being hyper still, 1 being kind of still, I'd say he's about a 4. And what you like to do and what you want to do in those moments is process the stillness and see how it changes over time. Over 3 minutes in a lot of bluff spots, players will continue to get still. Then they'll start to move and you'll start to see indications of uncomfort. Players that are nutted will start to, stay still for 90 seconds or something and then feel, all right, I need to release attention, and they'll move or they'll shift or something like that. Now, there's not that much to see here, and that's why I kind of use this hand as my first hand. I didn't want my first hand to be a spot that's filled with tells. I wanted it to be something that's, real and empirical and something that actually happens. Sometimes there's not deep, dark tells in every single hand. There will be in some of my hand breakdowns, but not particularly this one. So John sits there, and then John does the little move around. Now, this is what gets interesting about tells and behavior. What does the little move around mean, right? Is that a tell? Is that something? No. This would be my thesis or my, it's so biased right now reviewing it because I know what's going on. First of all, everything I know about John, a friend of mine, so I have context that this player doesn't. I don't think John's particularly worried about a $1,500 bet, whether he's bluffing or he's he's an experienced poker player, has been playing poker for years. It's not going to create such emotional arousal. That being said, I think he would be much less likely to do that type of movement if he was bluffing, just based on the mechanics behind stillness and how players handle concealment in that spot. It's to the point if I was playing John and I was in this spot, first of all, what would I do? I wouldn't shut up. I'd constantly be talking to John. I'd constantly try to break his concealment to see if I can see something. But that would lend me more towards folding in this spot, more towards thinking he has a hand that beats me. Also, there's just no sign of anything that would suggest that he's bluffing. There's none of the extreme call-outs, and he's just consistently maintaining his concealment strategy. He breaks it once for a little bit. I don't think there's any evidence that you can call here. If I was playing in this game and I was in this player's shoes, I would just definitely fold. But I would be, again, having a lot of conversations. He's really having a frustrated time here. It happens, guys. Use that frustration, though. Use it. Play on it. This is live poker. You're fucking looking at the person. I mean, it's ridiculous how many players in today's games, there's big impactful moments. Go into your head. I'm not saying, reverse engineering street by street and thinking about a player's range and thinking about the story, that's not important. That is important. But you should shift between paying attention to behavior, thinking about the story. Paying attention to behavior, thinking about the story. Most players don't even do that. No edge. Ridiculous. All right? And he is going to call, and I will not tell you what he has. Post below. After 10 days, I'll post in the comments what the player in the one seat actually has. Post below what you would do in this spot and what would happen. I think I kind of ruined it for you because I obviously am leaning towards folding, but who knows? I could be wrong. Maybe based on the context in this situation, you would have ended up calling or you would have had to call. So I know I went over a lot. I get really excited when I talk about tells. I'm going to be doing a lot of these, one every week, where I break down some element of behavior in the game and trying to blend it with context to open all of your eyes to the power of behavior at the poker table. It's something that for too long hasn't been recognized by the poker community, and it is absolutely ridiculous. Behavior is one of the most useful ways to drive your aggression, to alter your frequencies, and it's perfect for those of you who have a strong mechanical understanding of the game. You use behavior to be more exploitive, use behavior to deviate, use behavior to figure out things like sizing, or use behavior on the line in spots like this where there's just so much there. So happy to be back and do these. If you have any questions or comments, please post below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you do the Behavioral Edge training. It is really good. It's the first week of Beyond Tells. If you want to incorporate this more in your game, you can come join us. Beyond Tells. You'll see me everywhere talking about tells. Get used to it. Love you all. Bye.